Question 1. During the evaluation of proposals received in response to a request for proposal RFP, a contracting officer notes a significant technical weakness in one proposal, but also recognizes a substantial technical strength in another. The contracting officer is concerned that the technical weakness in the first proposal might be overlooked if the focus shifts too heavily to the strengths of the second proposal, potentially skewing the best value determination. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure a fair and compliant source selection? Option A. Disregard the technical weakness in the first proposal as minor, given the significant technical strength in the second proposal, and proceed with the best value determination, prioritizing the perceived overall superiority of the second offeror. Option B. Request clarification from the offeror with the technical weakness to address the deficiency, while simultaneously proceeding with the evaluation of the second proposal's strengths without a comprehensive reevaluation of all factors. Option C. Focus the evaluation primarily on the significant technical strength of the second proposal, assuming it outweighs any potential weakness in the first proposal, and proceed with the best value determination based on this perceived advantage. Option D. Conduct a thorough reevaluation of all proposals against all stated evaluation factors, ensuring that the identified technical weakness and strength are appropriately weighed within the overall assessment of each proposal's merit and risk, and that the best value determination reflects this balanced assessment. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough reevaluation of all proposals against all stated evaluation factors, ensuring that the identified technical weakness and strength are appropriately weighed within the overall assessment of each proposal's merit and risk, and that the best value determination reflects this balanced assessment. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in source selection, where a perceived deficiency in one proposal might lead to an attempt to compensate by overemphasizing strengths in another, potentially compromising the integrity of the evaluation process. The professional challenge lies in maintaining objectivity and adherence to the established evaluation criteria and methodology, ensuring a fair and equitable comparison of all proposals. The contracting officer's responsibility is to ensure the evaluation is conducted in accordance with the terms of the solicitation and applicable regulations, preventing bias from influencing the best value determination. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of each proposal against all stated evaluation factors, giving appropriate weight to each. This ensures that the source selection decision is based on a comprehensive understanding of each offeror's ability to meet the government's needs as defined in the solicitation. Specifically, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, Part 15, Contracting by Negotiation, mandates that proposals be evaluated in accordance with the criteria set forth in the solicitation. This includes a fair and impartial evaluation of both technical merit and cost or price. Overlooking or downplaying a significant weakness in one proposal, while excessively magnifying a strength in another, even if the latter is ultimately selected, violates the principle of fair evaluation and can lead to protests. An incorrect approach would be to allow a perceived minor weakness in one proposal to be disregarded in favor of a perceived significant strength in another, without a systematic reevaluation of all factors. This can lead to an unbalanced comparison and a flawed best value determination. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the strengths of the preferred offeror without adequately considering the weaknesses or risks associated with their proposal, or, conversely, to allow a minor weakness in a less preferred proposal to overshadow its overall strengths. Such actions can be seen as evidence of predetermined selection or bias, which are serious ethical and regulatory violations. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the solicitation's evaluation criteria and their relative importance. During evaluation, all proposals must be assessed against these criteria systematically. Any identified strengths and weaknesses should be documented objectively. The source selection authority must then make a best value determination based on the totality of the evaluated proposals, ensuring that the decision is defensible and aligns with the stated evaluation factors. If a perceived deficiency in one proposal is significant, it must be weighed appropriately against its strengths and in comparison to other proposals. Question 2. Compliance review shows that a contractor has verbally agreed to a minor scope adjustment requested by the government contracting officer and has begun work on this adjustment based on an email confirmation from the contracting officer. The contract itself contains a clause requiring all modifications to be made by a written amendment signed by both parties. What is the most appropriate course of action for the contractor to ensure compliance and protect its interests? Option A. Inform the government contracting officer that the verbal agreement and email confirmation are insufficient, and that work will only proceed upon receipt of a fully executed written amendment. Option B. Immediately cease work on the scope adjustment and formally request a written amendment to the contract reflecting the agreed-upon change before resuming work. Option C. Proceed with the scope adjustment and document the change internally, relying on the email confirmation as sufficient evidence of the agreement. Option D. Continue working on the scope adjustment as per the email confirmation, assuming the written amendment will be processed in due course. The correct answer is B. Immediately cease work on the scope adjustment and formally request a written amendment to the contract reflecting the agreed-upon change before resuming work. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in contract management, where a seemingly minor deviation from established procedures could have significant legal and financial ramifications. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for efficient contract execution with the imperative of adhering to regulatory requirements and ensuring the integrity of contractual agreements. A contract modification, even if perceived as beneficial by the parties involved, must strictly follow the established legal and regulatory framework to be valid and enforceable. Failure to do so can lead to disputes, invalidation of the modification, and potential penalties. The correct approach involves recognizing that any change to a contract, regardless of its perceived impact, requires formal documentation and adherence to the contract's modification clause and applicable regulations, such as the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, or Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, DFARS, if in a government contracting context. This ensures that the modification is legally binding, properly authorized, and reflects the true intent of the parties. It also provides a clear audit trail and protects against future claims of unauthorized changes or misunderstandings. This aligns with the fundamental principles of contract law and the specific requirements of government contracting regulations, which emphasize transparency, accountability, and formal processes for all contractual actions. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the change based on a verbal agreement or an informal email exchange. This fails to meet the statute of frauds requirements for certain types of contracts and modifications, and it bypasses the formal amendment or change order process mandated by most contract types and regulatory frameworks. Such an approach creates ambiguity, lacks legal enforceability, and exposes the parties to significant risk of contract disputes and potential legal challenges. It also undermines the principles of good faith and fair dealing by not establishing a clear, documented understanding of the revised terms. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that, because the change is minor, it does not require formal documentation. This overlooks the fact that even minor modifications can alter the legal rights and obligations of the parties and must be formally recorded to be effective. The absence of a formal amendment or change order leaves the contract in a state of uncertainty regarding the modified terms, which can be exploited in future disputes. A third incorrect approach would be to unilaterally implement the change without proper authorization or documentation, even if the intent is to benefit the other party. This disregards the need for mutual assent to the modification and the established procedures for contract changes. It can lead to claims of breach of contract or unauthorized actions, even if the underlying intent was positive. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the contract's terms, including its modification clauses and the applicable regulatory framework. Any proposed change should be evaluated for its potential impact on the contract's scope, price, schedule, and risk. A formal process for proposing, reviewing, approving, and documenting modifications should always be followed, ensuring that all changes are in writing, signed by authorized representatives, and clearly reflect the agreed-upon terms. This systematic approach mitigates risk and ensures the integrity and enforceability of contractual agreements. Question 3. Performance analysis shows that the incumbent contractor on a critical services contract has identified a novel technological solution that could significantly enhance service delivery and potentially reduce long-term costs. The contracting officer's representative, CORE, is aware that the incumbent is the only vendor currently possessing this specific technology. The COR is considering recommending a sole source modification to the existing contract to incorporate this new capability, believing it to be in the government's best interest. Option A. Advise the incumbent contractor to pursue a patent for their technology and then initiate a new competitive procurement for the enhanced services. Option B. Accept the incumbent's offer of the new technology as a contract modification without further review, as the identified benefits outweigh any procedural concerns. Option C. Immediately recommend a sole source modification to the existing contract to leverage the new technology, as it offers clear benefits to the government. Option D. Recommend a sole source modification to the existing contract, provided a thorough justification is documented, demonstrating that no other vendor can provide the required capability, and that this action is in the government's best interest, and consult with the contracting officer and legal counsel. The correct answer is D. Recommend a sole source modification to the existing contract, provided a thorough justification is documented, demonstrating that no other vendor can provide the required capability, and that this action is in the government's best interest, and consult with the contracting officer and legal counsel. Explanation. This scenario presents a common ethical dilemma in contract management, where a perceived benefit to the government might conflict with established procurement principles and ethical conduct. The challenge lies in balancing the desire for cost savings or improved performance with the imperative to maintain fair competition, transparency, and integrity in the procurement process. A contract manager must exercise sound judgment, adhering strictly to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, and ethical standards. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the FAR, specifically focusing on regulations pertaining to contract modifications, sole source procurements, and the principles of full and open competition. It requires documenting the rationale for any proposed action, ensuring it aligns with statutory requirements and agency policy. This approach upholds the integrity of the procurement system by ensuring that any deviation from the original contract terms is justified, transparent, and serves the best interests of the government without compromising fairness to other potential offerers. The ethical obligation is to act with impartiality and avoid any appearance of impropriety. An incorrect approach that involves directly awarding a modification to the incumbent without exploring competitive options violates the fundamental principle of full and open competition mandated by the FAR. This could be seen as an improper sole source procurement if the conditions for such an award are not met. Another incorrect approach, accepting the vendor's offer without proper justification or documentation, bypasses essential oversight and accountability mechanisms, potentially leading to wasteful spending or a perception of favoritism. Furthermore, failing to consult with legal counsel or the contracting officer when significant deviations are contemplated is a failure to follow established procedures and can expose the government to legal challenges and financial risks. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying the core issue and its potential impact on competition and fairness. They should then consult the relevant FAR clauses and agency-specific policies. If a deviation from the original contract or a change in procurement strategy is considered, a formal process of justification and approval, often involving the contracting officer and legal counsel, is essential. Maintaining clear, objective documentation throughout the process is paramount to demonstrating compliance and ethical conduct. Question 4. The monitoring system demonstrates that a severe, unexpected weather event has significantly disrupted the supply chain for a critical component required for contract performance. The contract includes a standard force majeure clause. What is the most appropriate initial action for the contractor to take to manage this risk and ensure compliance with contractual obligations? Option A. Immediately suspend performance of the contract until the supply chain is restored, assuming the weather event constitutes force majeure. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the contract's force majeure clause and assess whether the specific weather event and its impact meet the contractual definition and notification requirements. Option C. Proceed with alternative sourcing for the component without notifying the contracting officer. To avoid delays and potential penalties, Option D. Assume the government will automatically extend the contract delivery schedule due to the weather event, without any formal request or documentation. The correct answer is A. Immediately suspend performance of the contract until the supply chain is restored, assuming the weather event constitutes force majeure. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in contract management, effectively responding to unforeseen events that impact contract performance. The professional challenge lies in accurately assessing the situation, determining the appropriate contractual and regulatory response, and ensuring that actions taken are consistent with the contract terms and the governing regulatory framework for NCMA certifications. This requires a nuanced understanding of risk allocation, force majeure clauses, and the principles of contract administration. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the contract's force majeure clause and an objective assessment of whether the current event meets the defined criteria for such a clause. This aligns with the NCMA emphasis on adhering to contractual terms and regulatory guidance for risk management. Specifically, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, in the U.S., which is a foundational framework for many NCMA-certified professionals, provides guidance on contract clauses, including those related to unforeseen events and contractor relief. A diligent contractor will consult these provisions to understand their rights and obligations, and to initiate the appropriate contractual process for seeking relief or adjusting performance. This proactive and contractually compliant approach minimizes disputes and ensures fair treatment for both parties. An incorrect approach would be to unilaterally suspend performance without proper contractual justification or notification. This fails to adhere to the contractual risk allocation and the procedural requirements for invoking force majeure or seeking other forms of relief. Such an action could be considered a breach of contract, leading to potential penalties, damages, and reputational harm. Another incorrect approach would be to assume the event is covered by force majeure without consulting the specific contract language. Contracts often have precise definitions and exclusions for force majeure events, and a broad assumption can lead to misinterpretation and improper application of contractual remedies. Furthermore, failing to document the event and its impact thoroughly and not communicating with the contracting officer violates principles of good contract administration and transparency, which are critical in government contracting environments. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the specific contractual language governing unforeseen events. This involves a detailed review of the force majeure clause, any related clauses concerning delays or excusable non-performance, and the notification requirements. Next, they should objectively assess whether the event meets the contractual definition of a force majeure event. If it does, the next step is to follow the contractual procedures for notification and to document all impacts. If the event does not clearly fall under force majeure, professionals should explore other contractual remedies or engage in discussions with the contracting officer to find mutually agreeable solutions, always prioritizing transparency and adherence to the contract and applicable regulations. Question 5. Market research demonstrates that a novel technological solution, potentially best provided by a large, specialized firm, could significantly enhance mission effectiveness. However, the research also indicates that several small businesses possess capabilities that could address key components of this solution, or could partner to offer a competitive alternative if the requirement were structured appropriately. The contracting officer must now develop the acquisition strategy. Which of the following approaches best optimizes the process while adhering to regulatory requirements? Option A. Proceed with the acquisition strategy focused solely on the large firm's novel solution, assuming it represents the only path to achieving the identified mission enhancement, and address small business considerations in future, separate acquisitions. Option B. Artificially divide the requirement into numerous smaller, independent tasks to create multiple set-aside opportunities, without a clear plan for how these disparate elements will integrate into a cohesive and effective overall solution. Option C. Reevaluate the requirement to identify opportunities for small business set-asides, consider phased acquisitions, or explore joint venture possibilities to ensure fair opportunity and compliance with socioeconomic program goals, while still aiming to leverage the innovative aspects identified. Option D. Disregard the novel technological solution identified in market research and revert to a more traditional, less innovative acquisition approach that is known to be amenable to small business participation, without further analysis of the innovative option. The correct answer is C. Reevaluate the requirement to identify opportunities for small business set-asides, consider phased acquisitions, or explore joint venture possibilities to ensure fair opportunity and compliance with socioeconomic program goals, while still aiming to leverage the innovative aspects identified. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in contract planning, where the initial market research findings necessitate a strategic shift in acquisition planning to ensure fair opportunity and compliance with socioeconomic program goals. The professional challenge lies in balancing the desire for a specific, potentially innovative solution identified during research with the regulatory mandate to consider and support small businesses. Careful judgment is required to avoid inadvertently creating a barrier to entry for qualified small businesses, while still pursuing the best value for the government. The correct approach involves a thorough reevaluation of the acquisition strategy, specifically focusing on how to structure the requirement to allow for small business participation. This includes exploring strategies like set-asides, joint ventures, or phased approaches that can accommodate the capabilities of small businesses, while still leveraging the potential benefits of the initially identified solution. This aligns with Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 19, which mandates consideration of small business concerns and outlines various methods for their participation in government contracting. Ethically, it upholds the principle of providing fair opportunity to all qualified contractors, including those in socioeconomic categories. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the acquisition as initially envisioned without further consideration for small business participation, assuming the identified solution is the only viable path. This would violate FAR Part 19 emphasis on maximizing small business utilization and could lead to a protest and potential cancellation of the solicitation. Another incorrect approach would be to arbitrarily divide the requirement into smaller pieces solely to create set-aside opportunities, without a clear understanding of how these smaller components would integrate into a cohesive and effective overall solution, potentially compromising performance and increasing administrative burden. This lacks a strategic rationale and could be seen as an artificial fragmentation of the requirement. Finally, ignoring the market research findings and reverting to a standard, less innovative approach without a valid justification would fail to capitalize on potential efficiencies or technological advancements identified, and would not be a strategic optimization of the acquisition process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the market research outcomes and their implications. This should be followed by a comprehensive review of applicable regulations, particularly those pertaining to socioeconomic programs and acquisition planning. The next step involves brainstorming and evaluating various acquisition strategies that can address both the identified needs and regulatory requirements. This iterative process of analysis, strategy development, and regulatory compliance ensures that the acquisition plan is not only effective, but also legally sound and ethically responsible. Question 6. Strategic planning requires a contracting officer to evaluate a contractor's proposal for a complex service contract where adequate price competition is absent. The contractor has submitted a proposal with a price that appears competitive when compared to historical data from similar contracts. However, the contracting officer suspects that the contractor's overhead rates may be inflated due to inefficient internal processes, which could lead to unallowable costs being incorporated into the contract price. Which of the following approaches best ensures the government obtains a fair and reasonable price in this scenario, adhering to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR? Option A. Rely solely on price analysis techniques, comparing the proposed price to market research and other publicly available pricing information, without delving into the contractor's specific cost structure. Option B. Negotiate the price based on the contractor's assertion that their proposal represents the best value for the government, without independently verifying the underlying cost realism. Option C. Conduct a detailed cost analysis of the contractor's proposed direct and indirect costs, including a thorough review of their overhead rate structure and supporting documentation, to verify the reasonableness and allowability of all costs. Option D. Accept the proposed price based on its competitiveness with historical contract data, assuming that past pricing accurately reflects current cost realities and efficient operations. Correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed cost analysis of the contractor's proposed direct and indirect costs, including a thorough review of their overhead rate structure and supporting documentation, to verify the reasonableness and allowability of all costs. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in contract management, Balancing the need for competitive pricing with the imperative to ensure fair and reasonable costs are incurred by the government. The contracting officer must navigate the complexities of cost principles, estimating techniques, and negotiation strategies within the strict confines of the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR. The challenge lies in discerning when a contractor's proposed price, while seemingly competitive, may be based on an inadequate understanding or application of cost principles, potentially leading to an unallowable cost being incorporated into the contract. This requires a deep understanding of FAR Part 31, which governs cost principles for government contracts, and the ability to apply various cost and price analysis techniques to validate the contractor's proposal. The correct approach involves conducting a thorough cost analysis, specifically focusing on the contractor's direct and indirect costs, and verifying the reasonableness of their overhead rates. This aligns directly with FAR 15-404-1C, which mandates cost analysis when adequate price competition is absent or when the price is expected to exceed the simplified acquisition threshold. A robust cost analysis scrutinizes the contractor's cost accounting practices, ensuring compliance with FAR Part 31, and assesses the reasonableness and allowability of all proposed costs. This includes evaluating the contractor's cost estimating system and the underlying data used to develop the estimate. The goal is to determine if the proposed costs are realistic and reflect efficient performance, thereby ensuring the government pays a fair and reasonable price. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on price analysis without a supporting cost analysis, especially when competition is not adequate. Price analysis, as described in FAR 15-404-1B, is used to evaluate the reasonableness of prices when cost analysis is not required or feasible. If the contracting officer accepts a price based solely on comparison to other similar contracts, without verifying the underlying cost structure, they risk overlooking inflated indirect costs or unallowable direct costs that could be hidden within the overall price. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for cost analysis when necessary and could lead to an improperly priced contract. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a contractor's historical pricing automatically validates current proposals. While historical data can be a useful input, it does not absolve the contracting officer from performing current cost and price analysis. Market conditions, inflation, and changes in the contractor's operations can significantly impact current costs. Relying solely on historical prices without a current cost substantiation is a failure to adhere to the principles of fair and reasonable pricing as mandated by the FAR. Finally, accepting a proposal based on the contractor's assertion of best value without independent verification of cost realism is also an improper approach. While best value is a consideration, it must be supported by a realistic understanding of the costs associated with delivering that value. The contracting officer has an independent responsibility to ensure that the proposed costs are reasonable and allowable, regardless of the contractor's claims about the overall value proposition. The professional decision-making process in such situations requires a systematic approach. First, the contracting officer must determine if a cost analysis is required based on the FAR. If so, they must then gather and analyze the contractor's cost data, applying the relevant FAR Part 31 principles. This involves scrutinizing direct costs, indirect costs, and overhead rates. Simultaneously, price analysis techniques can be used to corroborate the cost analysis or as a primary tool when cost analysis is not mandated. The negotiation phase then leverages the findings from these analyses to ensure a fair and reasonable price is established. This iterative process of analysis and negotiation, grounded in regulatory compliance, is crucial for effective contract management. Question 7. The performance metrics show a significant delay in the delivery of critical technical data by a contractor on a sole source award under a firm fixed price contract. The contract includes standard FAR data rights clauses, but the contractor is asserting that the data is proprietary and requires additional compensation beyond the contract value for its release. Contract manager suspects the contractor may be misinterpreting the data rights or attempting to leverage the delay for additional profit, but also recognizes the potential for a genuine dispute over intellectual property. What is the most appropriate course of action for the contract manager? Option A. Issue a cure notice to the contractor for failing to deliver the data as required by the contract, citing the performance metrics as evidence of non-compliance. Option B. Advise the contractor that the government will not pay additional funds for data rights already covered by the contract, and instruct them to deliver the data immediately. Option C. Immediately consult with legal counsel and the agency's ethics office to review the contract's data rights clauses, relevant FAR and DFARS provisions, and assess any potential conflicts of interest before engaging further with the contractor. Option D. Report the contractor to the Inspector General for potential violations of the Anti-Kickback Act due to the demand for additional compensation. The correct answer is C. Immediately consult with legal counsel and the agency's ethics office to review the contract's data rights clauses, relevant FAR and DFARS provisions, and assess any potential conflicts of interest before engaging further with the contractor. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a contract manager to balance the need for timely contract performance with strict adherence to legal and ethical procurement principles, specifically concerning data rights and potential conflicts of interest. The contract manager must navigate the complexities of government regulations to ensure the government receives the data it is entitled to without violating contractor intellectual property rights or creating an appearance of impropriety. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the contract's data rights clauses, relevant FAR and DFARS provisions, and an assessment of any potential conflicts of interest. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the core issues, ensuring compliance with the contract and applicable regulations regarding data ownership and usage, while also upholding ethical standards by proactively identifying and mitigating any potential conflicts of interest. Specifically, FAR Part 27 patents, data, and copyrights, and DFARS Part 227 provide detailed guidance on data rights. Furthermore, the Procurement Integrity Act, 41 U.S.C. Section 423, and related ethical regulations, e.g., 5 C.F.R. Part 2635 for executive branch employees, mandate the avoidance of conflicts of interest and the maintenance of integrity throughout the procurement process. By engaging legal counsel and the ethics office, the contract manager demonstrates due diligence and ensures that any actions taken are legally sound and ethically defensible. An incorrect approach that involves unilaterally demanding the data without consulting legal counsel or reviewing the contract's data rights clauses fails to acknowledge the contractor's potential intellectual property rights and the specific terms of the agreement. This could lead to a contractual dispute, legal action, and a violation of FAR Part 27. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the performance metrics and the potential data issue to avoid conflict, violates the contract manager's responsibility to ensure contract compliance and could lead to the government not receiving critical data, potentially impacting mission success. This also fails to address potential ethical concerns if the contractor is withholding data due to a misunderstanding or perceived entitlement. A third incorrect approach, which is to immediately escalate to the Anti-Kickback Act or False Claims Act without proper investigation, is premature and inappropriate. These acts address fraud and illegal payments, which are not indicated by the performance metrics alone. Such an escalation without evidence could damage contractor relationships and waste investigative resources, and it bypasses the established procedures for resolving contract performance issues and data rights disputes. Professional reasoning in such situations requires a systematic approach. First, understand the contractual obligations and regulatory requirements. Second, identify potential ethical implications. Third, gather facts and consult relevant experts, legal, ethics. Fourth, develop a plan of action that is compliant, ethical, and addresses the performance issue. And finally, document all actions and decisions. Question 8. Quality control measures reveal that during a negotiation for a critical IT services contract, the contractor proposed a concession regarding the definition of timely delivery for a key deliverable. The contractor's proposed change, while seemingly minor, could introduce ambiguity and potentially weaken the government's ability to enforce strict performance timelines, thereby increasing program risk. The contracting officer, CO, is under pressure to finalize the contract quickly. What is the most appropriate course of action for the CO? Option A. Delegate the decision on whether to accept the concession to the program manager, as they are most familiar with the technical requirements. Option B. Engage in further negotiation to understand the full implications of the proposed concession, explore alternative language that protects the government's interests, and document the rationale for any agreed-upon changes. Option C. Accept the contractor's proposed concession immediately to expedite contract finalization, trusting the contractor's assertion that it is a minor adjustment. Option D. Reject the concession outright without further discussion, as any deviation from the original terms introduces unnecessary risk. Correct answer is C. Accept the contractor's proposed concession immediately to expedite contract finalization, trusting the contractor's assertion that it is a minor adjustment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in contract negotiation, where a seemingly minor concession, made under pressure to close a deal, could have significant long-term implications for the government's ability to enforce contract terms and achieve desired outcomes. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for agreement with the imperative to protect the government's interests and adhere to established procurement regulations. The contracting officer's responsibility is to ensure that all contractual terms are fair, reasonable, and legally sound, and that the negotiation process itself is conducted ethically and in accordance with federal acquisition regulations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves recognizing that the proposed concession, while seemingly small, fundamentally alters the risk allocation and potentially the government's recourse in case of non-performance. The CO must understand that concessions, especially those impacting critical performance metrics or remedies, require careful consideration and often necessitate a re-evaluation of the offer. The Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 15, Contracting by Negotiation, emphasizes the importance of obtaining a fair and reasonable price and ensuring that the contract terms protect the government's interests. Specifically, FAR 15, 404-1D requires that the CO obtain and analyze cost or pricing data to determine reasonableness. While this scenario doesn't directly involve cost, the concession impacts the overall value and risk profile of the offer. The CO's duty is to ensure that any agreement reached is in the best interest of the government, which includes not accepting terms that could lead to future disputes or financial loss. Therefore, the CO must engage in further negotiation or seek clarification to understand the full impact of the concession and ensure it aligns with regulatory requirements and program objectives. This might involve requesting a revised proposal or documenting the rationale for accepting the altered term. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that involves accepting the concession without further review or analysis is procedurally flawed. This bypasses the regulatory requirement to ensure a fair and reasonable outcome and could expose the government to undue risk. It fails to uphold the CO's fiduciary responsibility to the government. An approach that immediately rejects the concession without attempting to understand its implications or explore alternatives is also problematic. While caution is warranted, complete refusal without further dialogue might lead to the loss of a potentially valuable offer or unnecessarily prolong the negotiation process. The FAR encourages negotiation to achieve mutually agreeable terms, provided those terms are in the government's best interest. An approach that relies solely on the contractor's assurance that the concession is minor, without independent verification or analysis of its potential impact on performance or remedies, is a failure of due diligence. The CO cannot delegate their responsibility for evaluating the terms of the contract. Professional reasoning. Professionals in contract management must adopt a proactive and analytical approach to negotiation. This involves thorough preparation, understanding the government's requirements and risk tolerance, and critically evaluating all proposed terms and concessions. When faced with a concession that alters the fundamental nature of the offer or introduces potential risk, the professional decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the potential impact of the concession on contract performance, risk, and government recourse. 2. Consulting relevant regulations, e.g., FAR Part 15 and internal policies. 3. Engaging in further negotiation to understand the contractor's rationale and explore alternative solutions that mitigate risk. 4. Documenting all discussions, analyses, and decisions related to the concession. 5. Seeking legal or technical advice if the impact is unclear or significant. The ultimate goal is to reach an agreement that is fair, reasonable, and serves the best interests of the government, while adhering strictly to all applicable laws and regulations. Question 9. Investigation of a potential contract with a foreign supplier for critical components reveals that the supplier is located in a country with a high perceived risk of corruption and has offered a facilitation fee to expedite customs clearance. The supplier also claims to be fully compliant with all export regulations, but has not provided specific documentation to support this. The contract manager is under pressure to reduce costs and meet aggressive project timelines. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Advise the supplier that the facilitation fee is unacceptable and suggest they find a legal way to expedite customs, while proceeding with the contract based on their verbal confirmation of export compliance. Option B. Negotiate a revised contract that explicitly prohibits any facilitation fees and requires the supplier to provide detailed, verifiable documentation of their export control compliance, including relevant licenses and permits, before contract award. Option C. Proceed with the contract, accepting the supplier's assurances regarding export compliance and advising the supplier to handle the facilitation fee discreetly, as it is common practice in that region. Option D. Reject the supplier outright due to the high perceived risk of corruption and the lack of verifiable export compliance documentation, seeking alternative suppliers. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the contract, accepting the supplier's assurances regarding export compliance and advising the supplier to handle the facilitation fee discreetly, as it is common practice in that region. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating complex international trade regulations, potential ethical pitfalls, and the practicalities of cross-border transactions, all within the framework of U.S. law and NCMA certification standards. The contract manager must balance the desire for cost savings with strict adherence to legal and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough due diligence process that prioritizes compliance with U.S. export control regulations and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA. This includes verifying the supplier's compliance with export licensing requirements, understanding the destination country's import regulations, and ensuring that no improper payments or inducements are involved. This approach is justified by the need to avoid severe legal penalties, reputational damage, and the invalidation of the contract. Specifically, U.S. export control laws, such as the Export Administration Regulations (EAR), govern the export of goods and technology, and the FCPA prohibits bribery of foreign officials. NCMA certification implicitly requires adherence to ethical standards and legal compliance in contract management. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the contract based solely on the supplier's assurances without independent verification. This fails to acknowledge the contractual manager's responsibility to ensure compliance with U.S. export control laws, which could lead to significant penalties if the goods are exported illegally. Another incorrect approach would be to overlook the potential for bribery or facilitation payments, especially in countries with a high risk of corruption. This directly violates the FCPA and NCMA ethical guidelines. A third incorrect approach would be to disregard the import regulations of the destination country, which could result in delays, fines, or seizure of goods, impacting contract performance and potentially leading to breach of contract. Professionals should employ a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves identifying potential risks, legal, ethical, operational, assessing their likelihood and impact, and developing mitigation strategies. For international procurement, this means proactively researching and understanding all applicable laws and regulations, engaging legal counsel when necessary, and conducting thorough due diligence on foreign partners. A commitment to ethical conduct and transparency should guide all decisions, ensuring that cost savings do not come at the expense of legal or ethical integrity. Question 10. The risk matrix shows a high probability of delays in contractor deliverables due to potential supply chain disruptions. During the contract kickoff meeting, which approach best ensures regulatory compliance and effective contract administration under the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR? Option A. Delegate the responsibility for managing supply chain risks entirely to the contractor, assuming they will proactively address any potential disruptions without specific reporting requirements outlined in the meeting. Option B. Briefly acknowledge the supply chain risk and instruct the contractor to inform the contracting officer if any delays occur, then proceed with discussing general project timelines and administrative procedures. Option C. Focus the kickoff meeting on establishing clear communication channels, defining performance metrics for timely delivery, outlining the contractor's reporting obligations regarding potential delays, and agreeing on a process for proactive issue resolution, all while referencing relevant FAR clauses for contract administration. Option D. Prioritize discussing the contractor's invoicing procedures and payment terms, as these are critical for financial management, and defer detailed discussion of performance monitoring and risk mitigation to a later date. Correct answer is C. Focus the kickoff meeting on establishing clear communication channels, defining performance metrics for timely delivery, outlining the contractor's reporting obligations regarding potential delays, and agreeing on a process for proactive issue resolution, all while referencing relevant FAR clauses for contract administration. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a contract manager to balance the need for timely contract execution with the imperative of ensuring regulatory compliance and mitigating potential risks identified in the risk matrix. The pressure to move forward quickly can lead to shortcuts that violate established procedures, potentially resulting in contractual disputes, financial penalties, or even contract invalidation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all necessary steps are taken, even under time constraints, to uphold the integrity of the contract and the organization's compliance posture. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the contract's terms and conditions, particularly those related to performance standards, reporting requirements, and payment schedules, in conjunction with the identified risks. This proactive step ensures that the kickoff meeting agenda directly addresses how these risks will be managed and monitored throughout the contract lifecycle. Adherence to Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, Part 42, Contract Administration and Supervision, and relevant agency-specific supplements is paramount. FAR 42.101 mandates that contract administration functions be performed in accordance with the FAR and applicable agency regulations. A robust kickoff meeting, informed by the risk matrix, facilitates clear communication of expectations, establishes performance metrics, and outlines reporting protocols, directly supporting compliance with FAR 42.302 contract administration functions. This aligns with the ethical obligation to manage contracts responsibly and transparently. An incorrect approach that bypasses a detailed review of the risk matrix and contract terms for the kickoff meeting is professionally unacceptable. This failure to integrate risk management into the initial stages of contract administration directly contravenes the spirit and letter of FAR Part 42, which emphasizes proactive oversight. Such an oversight could lead to unaddressed risks manifesting as performance issues or disputes, violating the contract's intent, and potentially leading to noncompliance with contractual obligations. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on scheduling and logistical aspects during the kickoff meeting, neglecting to discuss performance monitoring and reporting mechanisms, is also professionally deficient. This oversight fails to establish the necessary framework for ongoing contract oversight as required by FAR 42.302(a)(1) and (a)(2), which cover surveillance of contractor performance and ensuring compliance with contract terms. Without clear performance metrics and reporting channels established at the outset, effective contract administration becomes significantly more difficult, increasing the likelihood of disputes and noncompliance. A third incorrect approach that delegates the responsibility for risk mitigation and performance monitoring to the contractor without establishing clear oversight mechanisms or reporting requirements is a critical failure. While contractors are responsible for their performance, the government retains oversight responsibility as per FAR 42.302(a)(1). This approach abdicates the government's contractual oversight duties, potentially leading to significant performance failures and noncompliance, which are direct violations of regulatory requirements and ethical contracting principles. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Understand the regulatory landscape. Always begin by identifying and understanding the applicable regulations, e.g., FAR, agency supplements. 2. Analyze the specific contract. Thoroughly review all contract clauses, including performance requirements, reporting, payment terms, and any special provisions. 3. Integrate risk management. Proactively identify and assess risks associated with the contract, using tools like a risk matrix. 4. Plan key contract administration events. Develop detailed plans for critical events like kickoff meetings, ensuring they address identified risks and contractual requirements. 5. Communicate clearly and document thoroughly. Ensure all parties understand their roles, responsibilities, and expectations. Maintain comprehensive records of all communications and decisions. 6. Monitor and adapt. Continuously monitor performance against the contract and adapt strategies as needed to manage risks and ensure compliance. Question 11. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a new research and development project for advanced artificial intelligence capabilities faces significant technical uncertainties and a high likelihood of evolving requirements throughout its lifecycle. The government desires to incentivize the contractor to achieve specific performance milestones and control costs effectively, while acknowledging that a firm, fixed price is not feasible at this stage. Which contract type would best align with these project characteristics and government objectives, according to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR? Option A. A cost-plus incentive fee (CPIF) contract, which allows for cost reimbursement and includes incentives for performance and cost control. Option B. An indefinite delivery/indefinite quantity (IDIQ) contract with fixed-price task orders to allow for future orders of evolving capabilities. Option C. A time and materials T&M contract, offering maximum flexibility for the government to adjust the scope as needed. Option D. A firm fixed price (FFP) contract, as it provides the most certainty for the government regarding final cost. The correct answer is D. A firm fixed price (FFP) contract, as it provides the most certainty for the government regarding final cost. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the contract manager to balance the government's need for flexibility in a rapidly evolving technological landscape with the contractor's need for predictable pricing to manage risk and ensure profitability. The choice of contract type has significant implications for both parties' financial exposure and the level of oversight required. Careful judgment is essential to select a contract type that aligns with the project's inherent uncertainties and the desired level of contractor performance incentives. The correct approach involves selecting a contract type that appropriately allocates risk and incentivizes performance given the project's characteristics. In this case, with a high degree of technical uncertainty and the potential for significant scope changes, a cost reimbursement contract, specifically a cost-plus incentive fee (CPIF) contract, is the most suitable. A CPIF contract allows the government to reimburse the contractor for allowable costs while providing a mechanism for sharing cost savings or overruns based on pre-negotiated targets and fee adjustments. This incentivizes the contractor to control costs and perform efficiently, aligning their interests with the government's. The Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 16, specifically FAR 16-304, guides the selection of cost reimbursement contracts when cost and performance uncertainties necessitate their use and a fixed-price contract is not feasible. The incentive fee structure, as outlined in FAR 16-402, directly addresses the need to motivate contractor performance in areas like cost, schedule, and technical objectives, which is critical for a project with evolving requirements. An incorrect approach would be to select a firm fixed-price (FFP) contract. This would place an excessive amount of risk on the contractor, who would be obligated to deliver the system within a fixed price, despite the significant technical uncertainties and potential for scope creep. The contractor would likely inflate their initial bid to cover these risks, leading to a higher overall cost for the government. Furthermore, if unforeseen technical challenges arise, the contractor might be incentivized to cut corners on quality or performance to avoid exceeding the fixed price, potentially jeopardizing the project's success. This contradicts the principle of fair and reasonable pricing and appropriate risk allocation, as mandated by FAR Part 16. Another incorrect approach would be to utilize a time and materials T&M contract without careful consideration of the evolving scope. While T&M contracts offer flexibility, they can lead to cost overruns if not properly managed and can lack strong incentives for contractor efficiency. Without a clear ceiling or performance incentives, the government bears a significant portion of the cost risk, and the contractor may have less motivation to control labor hours or material costs. FAR 16-601 states that T&M contracts should be used only when a precise statement of work cannot be formulated, and the government needs flexibility. However, for a project with evolving technical requirements, a CPIF contract offers a more structured approach to managing costs and incentivizing performance than a pure T&M contract. A third incorrect approach would be to use an indefinite delivery/indefinite quantity (IDIQ) contract without a clear understanding of the underlying technical requirements and the appropriate pricing structure for the anticipated work. While IDIQ provide flexibility for future orders, the initial contract type for the base period or the structure of the task orders themselves needs to be carefully considered. If the underlying work is highly uncertain and requires significant innovation, simply issuing a series of FFP task orders under an IDIC could lead to the same issues as a standalone FFP contract. The selection of the contract type for the IDIC itself, or the task orders issued under it, must still align with the principles of risk allocation and performance incentives. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of the project's objectives, the level of technical and performance uncertainty, and the desired outcomes. This involves engaging with technical experts and stakeholders to define the scope as clearly as possible, even if it is subject to change. The contract manager should then consult FAR Part 16 to identify contract types that best match these characteristics. A risk assessment should be conducted to understand the potential financial and performance implications of each contract type for both the government and the contractor. Finally, the chosen contract type should be clearly documented with a justification that aligns with regulatory requirements and best practices for effective contract management. Question 12. When evaluating a contractor's performance on a complex service contract, and initial reports indicate some delays in deliverables and minor quality issues, what is the most professional and effective approach to ensure contract compliance and foster continuous improvement, adhering to NCMA principles? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the contractor's performance data against the contractually defined key performance indicators, KPI and metrics, document any discrepancies with evidence, and if significant, initiate a collaborative corrective action plan (CAP) with the contractor to address the root causes and monitor progress. Option B. Focus solely on the contractor's adherence to the payment schedule and invoicing procedures, assuming that if they are being paid on time, their performance is satisfactory. Option C. Rely on informal feedback from the primary point of contact within the organization to gauge the contractor's overall performance and address any perceived issues through ad hoc conversations. Option D. Immediately issue a formal notice of deficiency and begin seeking alternative suppliers, as any deviation from the schedule or quality standards warrants severe action. The correct answer is D. Immediately issue a formal notice of deficiency and begin seeking alternative suppliers, as any deviation from the schedule or quality standards warrants severe action. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in contract management, balancing the need for objective performance measurement with the inherent subjectivity and potential for bias in supplier evaluations. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that performance evaluations are fair, accurate, and defensible, aligning with the principles of good contract administration and ethical conduct as espoused by the NCMA. It requires a systematic approach that moves beyond anecdotal evidence or personal opinions to a data-driven assessment. The correct approach involves a structured process that begins with clearly defined key performance indicators, KPI, and metrics established during contract negotiation. These should be measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. SMART. Performance reporting should be regular and transparent, providing objective data against these KPIs. Supplier performance evaluation should then be based on this reported data, supplemented by documented observations and evidence. When performance gaps are identified, a formal corrective action plan, CAP, should be developed collaboratively with the supplier, outlining specific steps, timelines, and responsibilities. Continuous improvement should be fostered through regular performance reviews and feedback loops, aiming to enhance both supplier performance and the contract management process itself. This aligns with NCMA emphasis on ethical conduct, professionalism, and the effective stewardship of government and commercial resources through sound contract management practices. The regulatory framework, while not explicitly detailed here as per the prompt's constraint on specific jurisdiction, generally supports such a systematic and documented approach to ensure accountability and value for money. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on informal feedback or anecdotal evidence from a single point of contact within the organization. This lacks objectivity and can be influenced by personal biases or incomplete information, failing to provide a comprehensive view of the supplier's performance. It also bypasses the established reporting mechanisms and the opportunity for collaborative problem-solving through a CAP. Another incorrect approach would be to focus exclusively on the supplier's adherence to contractual terms and conditions, without considering the broader impact on project objectives or the achievement of desired outcomes. While compliance is crucial, effective performance evaluation also assesses how well the supplier contributes to the overall success of the contract and the organization's strategic goals. This narrow focus can lead to a technically compliant but ultimately underperforming supplier relationship. A third incorrect approach would be to implement punitive measures immediately upon the first sign of a performance deviation, without first attempting to understand the root cause and offering the supplier an opportunity to rectify the issue through a CAP. This can damage the supplier relationship, hinder open communication, and may not be the most cost-effective way to achieve desired performance improvements. It fails to embrace the principle of continuous improvement and collaborative problem-solving. The professional decision-making process should involve 1. Referencing the contract for defined KPIs and reporting requirements. 2. Gathering objective performance data from all relevant sources. 3. Analyzing this data against the established metrics. 4. Documenting any performance deficiencies with supporting evidence. 5. Initiating a collaborative discussion with the supplier to develop a CAP if necessary. 6. Monitoring the effectiveness of the CAP and providing ongoing feedback. 7. Regularly reviewing the overall supplier performance and the contract management process for opportunities for continuous improvement. Question 13. The audit findings indicate that a critical supplier's recent invoices have not undergone the full, multi-stage verification process due to time constraints, and there is a question regarding the availability of sufficient funds within the allocated budget for the next payment cycle. The supplier has expressed urgency for payment to maintain delivery schedules, and your supervisor is pressuring you to expedite the payment to avoid disruption. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Process the payment for the undisputed portion of the invoice after confirming funds availability, and work with the supplier and internal finance to resolve the disputed amounts and complete the audit for the remaining balance. Option B. Expedite the payment by bypassing the remaining invoice audit steps and approving the payment based on a preliminary review, assuming funds will be available. Option C. Halt all payments to the supplier until the full invoice audit is completed and funds availability is definitively confirmed, and communicate the delay and reasons to the supplier. Option D. Authorize the payment immediately to maintain the supplier relationship and avoid delivery disruptions, while initiating a review of the invoice auditing process for future efficiency. The correct answer is D. Authorize the payment immediately to maintain the supplier relationship and avoid delivery disruptions, while initiating a review of the invoice auditing process for future efficiency. Explanation. This scenario presents a professionally challenging situation because it involves a conflict between immediate operational needs and established financial controls and reporting requirements. The contract manager is faced with pressure to expedite payments to maintain a critical supplier relationship, which could be jeopardized by delays, while simultaneously being aware of potential irregularities in the invoice auditing process. This requires careful judgment to balance stakeholder expectations, contractual obligations, and ethical responsibilities. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to the established invoice auditing procedures and ensuring funds availability before authorizing payment. This upholds the integrity of the financial management process, prevents potential fraud or overpayment, and ensures compliance with NCMA principles and relevant U.S. Federal Acquisition Regulations, FAR, concerning financial accountability and proper payment practices. Specifically, FAR Part 32, Contract Financing, and FAR Part 42, Contract Administration and Audit Services, emphasize the importance of verifying invoices and ensuring funds are available. Ethically, it aligns with the NCMA Code of Ethics, which stresses integrity, accountability, and responsible stewardship of resources. An incorrect approach of authorizing payment without completing the full invoice audit process, despite the audit findings, risks significant regulatory and ethical violations. This could lead to improper payments, potential financial losses for the government, and a breach of trust. It bypasses established internal controls designed to prevent errors and fraud, directly contravening the principles of sound financial management and accountability mandated by FAR. Another incorrect approach of delaying payment indefinitely without clear communication or resolution of the audit findings is also professionally unacceptable. While it avoids an improper payment, it can damage supplier relationships, potentially violate contract terms regarding payment timelines, and create operational disruptions if the supplier ceases to provide essential goods or services. This demonstrates a lack of proactive problem-solving and effective contract administration. A further incorrect approach of overriding the audit findings based on personal judgment or supplier pressure, without proper documentation or justification, is a serious ethical lapse. This undermines the audit function, sets a dangerous precedent for circumventing controls, and could expose the organization to financial and legal repercussions. It violates the principle of objective decision-making and accountability. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the specific contractual terms and applicable regulations, e.g., FAR. 2. Thoroughly investigating the audit findings and understanding their implications. 3. Consulting with relevant stakeholders, including the audit team, legal counsel, and finance department, to clarify procedures and risks. 4. Communicating transparently with the supplier regarding the process and any necessary steps. 5. Prioritizing compliance with regulations and ethical standards over expediency. 6. Documenting all decisions and justifications meticulously. Question 14. Analysis of a situation where a critical supplier has consistently missed delivery deadlines and provided components with a higher than acceptable defect rate, impacting the organization's production schedule and product quality, requires a strategic response. Which of the following actions best reflects a professional and compliant approach to managing this supplier relationship and mitigating further risks within the supply chain, adhering to U.S. Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR principles? Option A. Continue to accept late deliveries and defective parts to avoid disrupting the supply chain, while internally absorbing the costs and delays associated with these issues. Option B. Immediately issue a cure notice and prepare for contract termination due to the persistent performance failures, without further discussion or attempts at collaborative resolution. Option C. Focus solely on renegotiating the contract for a lower price, assuming that cost savings will offset the performance issues. Option D. Initiate a formal performance improvement plan with the supplier, clearly outlining the deficiencies, required corrective actions, timelines, and consequences of continued noncompliance, while simultaneously exploring alternative sourcing options as a contingency. The correct answer is D. Initiate a formal performance improvement plan with the supplier, clearly outlining the deficiencies, required corrective actions, timelines, and consequences of continued noncompliance, while simultaneously exploring alternative sourcing options as a contingency. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing competing interests within the supply chain to achieve optimal outcomes while adhering to regulatory requirements and ethical considerations. The contracting officer must make a judgment call that impacts cost, quality, delivery, and long-term supplier relationships. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the chosen approach aligns with the organization's strategic objectives and contractual obligations. The correct approach involves a comprehensive assessment of supplier performance data against established key performance indicators, KPI, and contractual terms, followed by a collaborative discussion with the supplier to identify root causes and develop a mutually agreeable corrective action plan. This aligns with the principles of effective supplier relationship management, SRM, and supplier performance management, SPM, as emphasized in contract management best practices. Ethically, it promotes fairness and transparency by providing the supplier an opportunity to improve before resorting to punitive measures. Regulatory frameworks governing government contracting, such as those outlined by the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR in the U.S., mandate fair dealing with contractors and encourage performance improvement. An incorrect approach of immediately terminating the contract without a thorough performance review and discussion fails to uphold the principles of fair dealing and can lead to significant disruption, increased costs for reprocurement, and potential legal challenges. This approach disregards the contractual obligation to address performance issues constructively and can be seen as a breach of good faith. Another incorrect approach of ignoring the performance issues to maintain a seemingly stable relationship is professionally negligent and ethically unsound. It undermines the integrity of the contracting process, exposes the organization to risks associated with substandard performance, e.g., production delays, quality defects, and can lead to a deterioration of overall supply chain health. This approach violates the duty to manage contracts effectively and protect the organization's interests. A third incorrect approach of solely focusing on cost reduction without considering the performance implications overlooks the interconnectedness of cost, quality, and delivery within the supply chain. While cost efficiency is important, it should not come at the expense of meeting contractual requirements. This approach can lead to a race to the bottom, where suppliers cut corners on quality or delivery to meet price targets, ultimately harming the organization. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve 1. Data gathering and analysis. Collect and analyze all relevant performance data against contractual requirements and KPIs. 2. Root cause analysis. Work with the supplier to understand the underlying reasons for performance deficiencies. 3. Collaborative problem solving. Develop and agree upon a corrective action plan with clear timelines and measurable outcomes. 4. Monitoring and evaluation. Continuously track progress against the corrective action plan. 5. Escalation and decision making. If performance does not improve, follow established contractual and organizational procedures for further action, including potential termination, but only after exhausting all reasonable efforts to resolve the issues. Question 15. The risk matrix shows a high probability of contractor-proposed labor cost reductions impacting service quality and potentially leading to noncompliance with Service Contract Act (SCA) labor standards. Which of the following approaches best mitigates these identified risks while adhering to the principles of performance-based service contracting and regulatory requirements? Option A. Accept the contractor's proposed labor cost reduction, assuming that cost savings will naturally lead to improved efficiency and service quality, and address any SCA compliance issues if they arise later. Option B. Implement the proposed labor cost reductions and conduct a post-award audit of SCA compliance only after the initial performance period has concluded to verify adherence to labor standards. Option C. Develop a robust quality assurance surveillance plan, CASP, that explicitly includes mechanisms for monitoring contractor adherence to SCA labor standards and links performance metrics in the service level agreements, SLAs, to these compliance checks. Option D. Focus solely on achieving the performance targets outlined in the service level agreements, SLAs, and trust the contractor to manage their labor costs and SCA compliance independently, without direct government oversight of labor practices. The correct answer is C. Develop a robust quality assurance surveillance plan, CASP, that explicitly includes mechanisms for monitoring contractor adherence to SCA labor standards and links performance metrics in the service level agreements, SLAs, to these compliance checks. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in service contracting where the contractor's proposed approach to managing service quality and labor standards directly impacts contract compliance and overall performance. The professional challenge lies in balancing cost-effectiveness with the stringent requirements of the Service Contract Act (SCA), and ensuring that performance-based objectives are met without compromising worker protections or service quality. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both compliant and effective. The correct approach involves a proactive and integrated strategy that directly addresses the identified risks. This approach recognizes that a robust quality assurance surveillance plan, CASP, is essential for monitoring contractor performance against established service level agreements, SLAs, and ensuring compliance with SCA labor standards. By embedding SCA compliance checks within the CASP and linking them to performance metrics in the SLAs, the government contracting team can effectively manage risks related to both service quality and labor practices. This aligns with the principles of performance-based contracting, which emphasizes outcomes and allows for contractor flexibility in achieving those outcomes, while maintaining government oversight. The regulatory justification stems from the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, Part 37, which promotes performance-based contracting, and the Service Contract Act itself, which mandates specific labor standards. A well-defined CASP is a critical tool for ensuring contractor compliance and achieving desired service outcomes. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the contractor's proposed labor cost reductions without verifying their impact on service quality or SCA compliance is professionally unacceptable. This failure ignores the fundamental requirement to ensure that all contract terms, including labor standards, are met. Regulatory failure lies in neglecting the explicit mandates of the SCA, which protect service employees. Ethically, It demonstrates a disregard for worker welfare and fair labor practices. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes the contractor's proposed performance metrics in the SLA without a corresponding mechanism to verify SCA compliance is also professionally flawed. While SLAs are crucial for defining performance, they do not absolve the government of its responsibility to ensure compliance with labor laws. The regulatory failure here is the disconnect between performance measurement and labor standards enforcement. Ethically, it creates a loophole where cost savings might be achieved at the expense of worker rights. A third incorrect approach that suggests deferring SCA compliance verification to a later stage of the contract, after performance has been established, is also professionally unsound. SCA compliance is an ongoing requirement, not a post-performance audit item. The regulatory failure is the misinterpretation of SCA as a one-time check rather than a continuous obligation. Ethically, this approach risks allowing noncompliance to persist, potentially leading to significant back pay and penalties, and undermining the integrity of the contracting process. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a comprehensive risk assessment that considers all aspects of the contract, including performance, labor standards, and cost. The contracting team must then develop a strategy that integrates these elements, utilizing tools like CASP and SLAs to ensure both compliance and desired outcomes. This requires a thorough understanding of relevant regulations, such as the SCA and FAR provisions on performance-based contracting, and a commitment to ethical contracting practices that protect both government interests and worker rights. Question 16. The efficiency study reveals that a potential vendor for a critical IT system upgrade has a strong technical proposal. The contracting officer reviewing the proposal discovers that the lead engineer on the vendor's proposal team is a close personal friend from college with whom they maintain regular social contact. The contracting officer has no financial interest in the vendor. Which of the following approaches best upholds ethical principles and professional standards in this situation? Option A. Delegate the entire evaluation and selection process for this vendor to a junior team member without informing them of the personal relationship. Option B. Immediately disqualify the vendor due to the potential for a conflict of interest, regardless of the proposal's technical merit. Option C. Disclose the personal relationship to their supervisor and recuse themselves from all aspects of the evaluation and selection process for this specific procurement. Option D. Proceed with the evaluation of the vendor's proposal, confident in their ability to remain objective and ensure a fair assessment based solely on merit. Correct answer is D. Proceed with the evaluation of the vendor's proposal, confident in their ability to remain objective and ensure a fair assessment based solely on merit. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for a conflict of interest and the need to uphold the integrity of the contracting process. The contracting officer must navigate a situation where a personal relationship could be perceived as influencing professional judgment, even if no explicit impropriety is intended. Maintaining public trust and adhering to ethical standards are paramount in government contracting. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the relationship and recusing oneself from any decision-making processes that could be affected by it. This aligns with the NCMA Code of Ethics and Standards of Conduct, which emphasize integrity, impartiality, and avoiding even the appearance of impropriety. Specifically, principles related to conflicts of interest require individuals to avoid situations where personal interest could compromise their professional duties. By disclosing and recusing, the contracting officer demonstrates a commitment to fairness and transparency, safeguarding the integrity of the procurement. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the evaluation without disclosure, assuming personal objectivity can overcome the appearance of bias. This fails to meet the ethical standard of avoiding the appearance of impropriety and could lead to accusations of favoritism or unfair treatment, eroding trust in the procurement process. Another incorrect approach would be to delegate the decision to a subordinate without proper oversight or guidance, potentially shifting responsibility without addressing the root ethical concern. This does not demonstrate leadership in ethical conduct. Finally, attempting to subtly influence the evaluation process to favor the acquaintance, even if rationalized as a minor adjustment, constitutes a severe breach of integrity and impartiality, directly violating ethical principles and potentially legal statutes. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations. This involves identifying potential conflicts of interest early, understanding relevant ethical codes and regulation, seeking guidance when unsure, and acting with transparency and impartiality. When faced with a potential conflict, the default action should be disclosure and, if necessary, recusal to ensure the integrity of the process and maintain public confidence. Question 17. Research into the ethical considerations of government contracting reveals a scenario where a contracting officer, co, discovers they have a close personal friendship with an individual who is a key executive at a company submitting a proposal in response to an ongoing request for proposal RFP that the CO is managing. The RFP is for a significant service contract, and the CO is responsible for overseeing the entire source selection process, including proposal evaluation and the final best value determination. What is the most appropriate course of action for the CO? Option A. Proceed with the evaluation and source selection, but ensure the proposal from the friend's company is evaluated objectively and that any potential bias is consciously avoided during the process. Option B. Inform the friend's company that a conflict exists and advise them to withdraw their proposal to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Option C. Continue with the evaluation and source selection, but exclude themselves from reviewing only the price proposal of the friend's company, believing this mitigates the conflict. Option D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their supervisor and the agency's ethics counsel, and request to be recused from all aspects of the solicitation and source selection process involving that company. Correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their supervisor and the agency's ethics counsel, and request to be recused from all aspects of the solicitation and source selection process involving that company. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a conflict of interest and the potential for unfair advantage during the source selection process. The contracting officer's, co, personal relationship with a potential offeror creates an appearance of impropriety, which can undermine the integrity of the procurement and lead to protests. Maintaining fairness, transparency, and objectivity is paramount in government contracting, as mandated by federal acquisition regulations. The correct approach involves immediate disclosure of the personal relationship to the appropriate authorities and recusal from any part of the solicitation or source selection process involving the company. This upholds the ethical principles of impartiality and avoids even the appearance of favoritism. Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, Part 3, Improper Business Practices and Personal Conflicts of Interest, specifically addresses such situations, requiring individuals to avoid situations where their personal interests could impair their impartiality or create an appearance of impropriety. Recusal is the standard ethical and regulatory remedy to ensure a fair and unbiased evaluation and selection. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the evaluation and source selection while downplaying the relationship or believing personal objectivity can overcome the conflict. This fails to acknowledge the appearance of impropriety, which is as damaging as an actual conflict. It violates FAR 3-101-1, which states that government employees shall not engage in outside employment or activities that create a conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to mitigate the conflict by simply excluding the individual from reviewing specific sections of the proposal related to price, while still participating in the overall evaluation and decision. This does not fully remove the individual from the process and still leaves room for perceived bias, failing to meet the stringent requirements for impartiality. A further incorrect approach is to delay disclosure until after the source selection decision. This is a significant ethical and regulatory failure, as it deprives the agency of the opportunity to implement proper safeguards from the outset and can be seen as an attempt to conceal the conflict, leading to severe consequences, including contract cancellation and disciplinary action. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a proactive and transparent approach. When a potential conflict of interest arises, the professional must immediately identify the conflict, consult relevant ethical guidelines and regulations, such as FAR Part 3, and report the situation to their supervisor or designated ethics official. The decision to recuse oneself from the process is a critical step in preserving the integrity of the procurement. This ensures that all offerors are treated fairly, and that the source selection decision is based solely on the merits of their proposals and the established evaluation criteria. Question 18. System analysis indicates that a federal agency is considering the adoption of a new e-procurement system to streamline its acquisition processes. Which of the following approaches best ensures that the implementation aligns with regulatory requirements and maximizes operational benefits while mitigating risks? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment evaluating technical, operational, security, and compliance implications across all relevant departments, and develop a phased implementation plan with robust training and change management. Option B. Rely primarily on vendor demonstrations and testimonials to select the system that promises the most immediate efficiency improvements. Option C. Prioritize the system with the lowest upfront cost, assuming that efficiency gains will offset any minor integration challenges. Option D. Implement the system quickly to realize cost savings, deferring comprehensive training and detailed impact analysis until after the initial rollout. Correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment evaluating technical, operational, security, and compliance implications across all relevant departments, and develop a phased implementation plan with robust training and change management. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in modern contract management, integrating new technology into established procurement processes. The professional challenge lies in balancing the potential benefits of e-procurement systems, such as increased efficiency and data visibility, with the inherent risks of data security, system integration, and ensuring compliance with regulatory frameworks. A hasty or ill-considered implementation can lead to significant operational disruptions, financial losses, and legal liabilities. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that maximizes benefits while mitigating risks, ensuring alignment with organizational goals and regulatory mandates. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that evaluates the potential effects of implementing an e-procurement system across all relevant functional areas. This assessment should consider technical feasibility, operational workflow changes, data security implications, training needs, and the system's ability to support compliance with relevant U.S. federal procurement regulations, e.g., the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR. This proactive, holistic evaluation ensures that the chosen system aligns with existing policies, addresses potential challenges before they arise, and maximizes the return on investment while maintaining legal and ethical standards. This aligns with the NCMA emphasis on professional competency and ethical conduct in contract management, which necessitates a thorough understanding of the implications of technological adoption. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on cost reduction without a broader impact assessment is professionally unacceptable because it neglects critical factors like system integration, data security, and potential operational disruptions. This can lead to the selection of a system that is cheaper but ultimately more expensive due to hidden costs or compliance failures. Prioritizing vendor claims of immediate efficiency gains without independent validation is also professionally unsound. This approach risks overlooking potential system limitations, integration challenges, or security vulnerabilities that the vendor may not disclose. It bypasses the due diligence required to ensure the system meets the organization's specific needs and regulatory obligations. Implementing the system without adequate stakeholder training and change management is a significant ethical and professional failure. This leads to user resistance, errors in system usage, and a failure to realize the intended benefits, potentially compromising contract compliance and data integrity. It demonstrates a lack of consideration for the human element of technological adoption, which is crucial for successful implementation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, risk-based approach to technology adoption and procurement. This involves 1. Defining clear objectives for the technology implementation. 2. Conducting a thorough needs analysis and market research. 3. Performing a comprehensive impact assessment covering technical, operational, financial, and compliance aspects. 4. Engaging relevant stakeholders throughout the process. 5. Developing a robust implementation and change management plan. 6. Establishing clear metrics for success and ongoing monitoring. This systematic process ensures that technology investments are strategically aligned with organizational goals and regulatory requirements, fostering efficient, compliant, and ethical contract management practices. Question 19. Comparative studies suggest that contract managers often face challenges in distinguishing between unilateral change orders and bilateral modifications when a contractor expresses reservations about proposed alterations to the contract scope. In a scenario where a government contracting officer, (CO), intends to significantly alter the fundamental nature of the work under an existing fixed-price contract, and the contractor has formally communicated concerns regarding the feasibility and cost implications of these proposed alterations, which of the following actions best adheres to the regulatory framework governing contract modifications under the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR? Option A. Issue a unilateral change order directing the contractor to proceed with the altered work, citing the CO's authority to direct changes within the general scope of the contract and address the contractor's concerns through subsequent discussions. Option B. Advise the contractor that their reservations are not grounds to refuse a directive and that failure to perform the altered work will be considered a breach of contract. Option C. Engage in negotiations with the contractor to reach a mutual agreement on the scope, cost, and schedule impacts of the proposed alterations, and formalize this agreement through a supplemental agreement. Option D. Proceed with the altered work based on informal discussions with the contractor, assuming their continued performance implies acceptance of the changes, and document the changes at a later date. The correct answer is A. Issue a unilateral change order directing the contractor to proceed with the altered work, citing the CO's authority to direct changes within the general scope of the contract, and address the contractor's concerns through subsequent discussions. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a contract manager to navigate the complexities of contract modification while adhering strictly to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, and potentially the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, DFARS. Depending on the agency, the core challenge lies in distinguishing between a contract modification that requires a formal bilateral agreement, an amendment, and one that can be unilaterally directed by the government, a change order, especially when the contractor expresses reservations. Misinterpreting this distinction can lead to disputes, potential claims, and a breakdown in the contractual relationship. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the government exercises its rights appropriately, without exceeding its authority or creating unintended contractual obligations. The correct approach involves recognizing that the contractors expressed reservations about the scope and impact of the proposed changes, coupled with the government's desire to alter the fundamental nature of the work, necessitates a bilateral agreement. This aligns with the principles of contract modification under the FAR. Specifically, FAR 43-103A defines a contract modification as a written amendment to the contract, while FAR 43-103B distinguishes between supplemental agreements, bilateral and unilateral modifications, change orders. The nature of the proposed changes, altering the fundamental nature of the work, strongly suggests that a supplemental agreement requiring the contractor's consent is the appropriate mechanism. The contractor's reservations further underscore the need for negotiation and mutual assent, as required for contract formation and modification. This approach upholds the principles of good faith and fair dealing inherent in government contracting. An incorrect approach would be to issue a unilateral change order despite the contractor's reservations and the significant alteration to the work. This fails to acknowledge the contractor's right to dispute the change's necessity, scope, or impact on cost and schedule, as protected under FAR 43-204. Issuing a unilateral change order in such circumstances could be viewed as constructive change, potentially leading to a contractor claim for equitable adjustment. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the contractor's reservations and proceed with the changes without any formal modification process. This violates the requirement for documenting all contract changes and risks creating an undocumented, informal agreement that is difficult to manage and enforce, and it bypasses the established procedures for contract modification outlined in FAR Part 43. Finally, attempting to resolve the issue through informal discussions without documenting the agreement or disagreement in writing would be a failure to adhere to the regulatory requirement for written modifications, as stipulated in FAR 43-103A. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of the proposed change and its potential impact. The contract manager must then consult the relevant FAR and DFARS if applicable, provisions governing contract modifications. If the change appears to alter the fundamental nature of the work, or if the contractor expresses significant reservations, the default should be to pursue a bilateral supplemental agreement. This involves open communication with the contractor, negotiation of terms, including price and schedule adjustments, and the execution of a formal modification document signed by both parties. If there is doubt about whether a change is unilateral or bilateral, erring on the side of a bilateral agreement is generally the safer and more compliant course of action. Question 20. The control framework reveals that an urgent need for specialized cybersecurity services has arisen, critical to national security. The contracting officer believes only one company possesses the unique expertise and clearances required to meet the immediate deadline and effectively address the threat. What is the most appropriate course of action under the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, to acquire these services? Option A. Proceed with a full and open competitive solicitation, explaining to the requiring activity that the urgency cannot override the mandatory requirement for competition. Option B. Award the contract to the identified company immediately to address the urgent national security threat, deferring any formal justification documentation until after the immediate crisis is resolved. Option C. Initiate a sole source procurement after documenting the unique capabilities of the identified company and the critical nature of the threat, seeking the necessary approvals for other than full and open competition. Option D. Solicit proposals from a select group of companies known to offer cybersecurity services without conducting a full and open competition to expedite the process. Correct answer is C. Initiate a sole source procurement after documenting the unique capabilities of the identified company and the critical nature of the threat, seeking the necessary approvals for other than full and open competition. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in government contracting where the urgency of a requirement clashes with the need for fair and open competition. The contracting officer must balance the immediate need for services with the legal and ethical obligations to procure them in a manner that ensures the best value for the government and maintains public trust. The challenge lies in determining if the circumstances truly justify bypassing the standard competitive procurement process. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented justification for other than full and open competition. This requires demonstrating that only one responsible source can satisfy the agency's need, and that no other supplies or services will suffice. This aligns directly with Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 6, which outlines the policies and procedures for competitive contracting and the limited circumstances under which exceptions are permitted. The FAR emphasizes that competition is the preferred method, and any deviation must be rigorously justified and approved. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with a sole source award based on a perceived urgency, without a proper FAR Part 6 justification. This failure to follow regulatory requirements undermines the principles of fair competition and could lead to protests, waste of government funds, and damage to the agency's reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to solicit proposals from a limited number of known sources without a documented justification for restricting competition. While seemingly more competitive than a sole source award, it still violates the FAR's mandate for full and open competition unless specific exceptions apply and are properly documented. Finally, awarding the contract without any justification for the procurement method would be a severe regulatory and ethical breach, demonstrating a disregard for established procurement laws and principles. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the specific agency needs and the urgency. They must then consult the FAR, particularly Part 6, to identify any applicable exceptions to full and open competition. If an exception appears relevant, the contracting officer must meticulously gather evidence to support the justification, ensuring it is comprehensive, accurate, and meets all regulatory criteria. This documentation is crucial for transparency, accountability, and defending the procurement decision if challenged. If no valid exception applies, the contracting officer must proceed with a full and open competitive process, even if it requires more time.